Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Let's turn to Pete Hegseth. David thinks we've been a little too hard on Hegseth as Trump's choice for Secretary of Defense. He says, while it is true that Hegseth does not have any experience in government, I believe that could be a positive in some ways. Hegseth seems like the kind of guy who can bridge the growing gap between the rank and file members of the military and the generals at the Pentagon, as well as help with the recruiting problems the military has come across in the last couple of years. Bill, I think David has a point there. That might be a positive of Hegseth not being a stiff bureaucratic general, somebody who can go out and speak highly of his service. Pete Hegseth served honorably in Iraq and Afghanistan, I believe, and make the case to young men and young women that a military career is something that is worth going into. But similar to the conversation we've been having about Kash Patel, one of the concerns is that the Pentagon bureaucracy is enormous. And if the job is to go into the Pentagon and reform it, it helps to have some background in that, have some experience tangling with the bureaucracy. And notable now that we have a story from the New Yorker suggesting that Hegseth, in previous roles in a couple of nonprofits that he ran, Veterans for Freedom and Concerned Veterans for America, allegedly was not up to the task. Some suggestion, Bill, that there were expenses that weren't being watched, that the first of these nonprofits that he ran essentially was forced to merge with another group after it got into debt, and nobody minding the store. And Bill, I wonder what you make of these arguments.
For one thing, Pete Hegseth is a combat veteran. And I think we ought to respect that. You know, to me, that's more important than having experience at a bureaucracy. The idea that the conservative view is what we need is an experienced bureaucrat, I think is a little overstated. Now, that said, the reason Pete Hegseth is in trouble is because of the troubling stories from the past about alcohol use, sexual interactions with women, and the financial mismanagement of these nonprofits he's led. That's why he's in trouble for that. To me, one of the tests is whether he told the truth to President Trump, to the transition team, when he was asked to serve, and he fessed up, I've got these in my background. If he did, they might be able to brazen him out. But he might not have been my first pick, but he is the president's first pick. You know, it gets back to this. I agree with Kim on the Trump loyalists. I don't know any president that doesn't pick loyalists for the job. And often it's the first criteria. And I think Donald Trump has a particular reason for it, because remember the first term, Jeff Sessions recused himself from the Russia probe, which totally discredited the FBI and Justice Department. We had a crippled attorney general. So I think it's understandable to be concerned about this. You know, everyone knows the Pentagon is badly in need of reform. It's a behemoth, very hard to do. I somehow think he'll get through unless there are more things we don't know yet that come out. And if he was untruthful when he submitted his forms talking about his past.
Kim, what's your take? And to Bill's point about more to come out, one of the things that's notable in this New Yorker story is it refers to some actual paper on these allegations. So here's a line: a previously undisclosed whistleblower report on Hegseth's tenure as president of Concerned Veterans of America from 2013 until 2016 describes him being repeatedly intoxicated while acting in his official capacity to the point of needing to be carried out of the organization's of events. It talks about this as a 7-page report compiled by multiple former CVA employees and sent to the organization's senior management. And part of why that is notable to me, Kim, is probably we're going to hear some senators say, I'd like to see that report.
And the interesting question will be if they can obtain it. I think it was very noble. And here's the problem for the New Yorker and for those who are throwing out these allegations against Pete Hegseth, which is that regardless of their merit or not, they're all anonymous. And we're not getting any people who are willing to go on the record really and make these claims. That has allowed Hegseth and his lawyer to state in that story that this is the work of disgruntled disgruntled employees and former colleagues of Hegseth who had their own personal axe to grind. And I think in absence of kind of more facts and details, that it's going to be another one of these set of allegations that senators will feel able to dismiss because there's nothing concrete behind them. And that's where I think Bill is right, that if there are some details that are undeniable and that they come from credible sources, that might be different. But what we've got so far, if you think about it, are a lot of allegations, mostly from people whose names we don't know. Also some conflicting evidence, in particular, when you look at the episode of claims of sexual harassment or abuse against him out in California. There's a lot of conflicting evidence there. And I just don't think that senators are likely at the moment to tank a nomination based on hearsay. So I think that's going in Pete Hegseth's favor to date.
Finally, a couple letters on the Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Susan in Iowa says she saw Vivek Ramaswamy before the caucus. She says, I asked how he was going to make changes when the civil servant part of the government is so entrenched. His response was that on the first day he took office, he would issue an executive order terminating the employment of all federal employees. He cited a provision that allows the president to do that. I asked him similar questions. She goes on to say that I wish his new effort well, but I'm not hearing this approach anymore. I recall some of those comments before the Iowa caucus. Vivek Ramaswamy was saying, here's one tweet from him, day one, instantly fire 50% of federal bureaucrats. Here's how, if your social security number ends in an odd number, you're fired. That downsizes government by half. I also have not heard that lately. It seems to me that this DOGE effort is retrenching a little bit and trying to get more realistic about what it might actually accomplish. And then Oliver says he's a high school senior interested in going into diplomacy. He says he's concerned now that this DOGE effort might go after the State Department. Everything I've read and heard has been more focused on alleviating redundancies domestically, not necessarily targeting the Foreign Service or the Department of Defense. But do you think there are plans going forward to expand the DOGE's reach to the State Department? And Bill, we talked a little bit about the DOGE on a podcast, but with neither of these two panelists, so we will let you two get your licks in.
First of all, if Elon Musk and Vivek are planning that to fire half the employees, I'd say, what squishes? Only stop at 50%? Come on, there's a lot more ways to that. Look, that kind of thing is going to be jammed up in the courts for a long time. I wish them well. There's certainly a lot of fat in the government, but I think a lot of people have tried to do this before. I'm very skeptical, not because I don't doubt their intentions or their abilities, but for the simple reason there's no pricing mechanism in government. There's nothing like there is in the private sector. So it's not that the people are evil or nefarious. I just think they can't do it. When I was in the Bush administration, I was looking around at all the federal programs and just thinking, how could we make them run better? And I just eventually threw up my hands. I thought the only way to reform is to shrink the government. I mean, I'm more interested in the pledge to abolish the Department of Education. But I think those are the only way that we can really shrink government, plus with entitlements off the table. I'm just very doubtful. It might do some good, but I have a doubt that it's going to do long-lasting good.
Kim, I tend to agree with Bill here, given the civil service protections and the congressional prerogatives on directing where spending goes. My take last week, though, was that I don't mind having a second pair of eyes or a third pair of eyes, since it's Elon and Vivek together on this kind of stuff. And maybe they can prompt a little bit more ambition from cabinet secretaries who might have an instinct to protect the departments they're in charge of once they get in the door.
So I like to tell this story. In the wake of the IRS targeting scandal that happened in the Obama administration, I remember I had a congressman who called me up because I had written so much about this and said, we're trying to come up with a law, some new rules and regulations that will guarantee that this doesn't happen again. And I remember giggling and telling him, I was like, I think that's a really wonderful ambition. But so long as you have a tax code that is as complicated as it is, and and as messy as it is, and that many IRS agents, you will never guard against this. You really want to make sure this doesn't happen again? Do a flat tax. Okay. Take away the ability of IRS agents to make judgment calls. And that is what I hope that Ramaswamy and Musk bear in mind as they do this is sure, cut the numbers, but don't forget that those who are left can still do great mischief as well too. And if you really want to put the bureaucracy back into the box, you have to take away their power and decision-making abilities to a certain extent, their ability to cause a problem. The other thing that I hope that they bear in mind is that they aren't just taking on, it's so easy to say, oh, we're taking on the deep state, watch us do this. They are taking on all of Washington because look, right now, why is Department of Defense procurement a mess? Why can it never be made more streamlined and more cost efficient? Because how many factories are in so-and-so congressman's district? And you have to make sure that we keep making this outdated munitions so that the people in that district continue to have their job at that factory. So the constituencies are built in and locked in. They go a lot beyond just the kind of day-to-day federal workers. And this is a problem, like Bill said, it's enormous in its scope and its breadth. But just suggesting that firing a bunch of random people rather than very specific ones and also looking at processes and structures and reform, you're not going to accomplish it just by lowering the head count.
Thank you, Kim and Bill. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.